To amateur buyers, this ride was worthless scrap, just a rusted shell with zero obvious value. The seams were rusted through. As for the interior, absolutely ruined and stripped bare. Still, Liam snagged the whole thing for just $120 at auction. Nobody asked why. None of those wealthy snobs realized this budget buyer saw the real profit potential. Then Evelyn Holt, the flashy CEO of Holt Motors, shamed him. She did it in front of the press, a huge crowd, and his 7-year-old daughter. She actually ordered his investment crushed. It turned out to be the costliest mistake she ever made. Stick with me here. Could this clever dad protect his asset before the tow truck crushed his payday? Let's look back. The morning started simple and low cost in the Harper home, quiet, calm, and practical. Liam stood silently by the kitchen counter, back to the window, waiting for his morning coffee to brew. He stared at the steam rising from the pot, vanishing into the dim light that filtered through their old curtains. Behind him, his daughter Arya was playing with her cheap cereal, dragging her spoon in lazy circles. Her old stuffed horse rested against the sugar bowl, like it was a permanent fixture at their table. The small toy was faded brown. Its fabric was completely worn down from years of being carried around and squeezed tight. She named him Dusty when she was only 4, and saw no reason to change it as she grew. Liam watched his little girl. Out of the corner of his eye, he kept quiet about the toy, respecting their peaceful morning routine. And keeping their daily life steady was the best investment this dad could ever make. At 38 years old, he had been managing things solo for the last 3 years. Over those challenging 3 years, he learned that a solid routine was worth more than any luxury money could buy. Arya's mother had passed away on a cold Tuesday back in February, right when their heater broke down, and the plumbing had been leaking for an entire month. After she died, Liam worked tirelessly to repair every single broken thing in their house, because his greatest loss was something he simply could not fix. And sitting around doing nothing in that empty house was unbearable. He restored the table, replaced the heater, and sealed up every drafty window himself. Through all that hard labor, without even aiming for it, he built a stable life for them. You and I know that real security starts small. Now that she was 7, this quiet schedule was an asset he protected fiercely every single day. He finally grabbed his cup and turned around. Arya was whispering quietly to Dusty, sharing a secret conversation clearly not meant for his ears. Giving her some space, he quietly pulled up a chair across from her with his mug. She looked up and asked, "Dad, can I please tag along with you today?" With school closed, he did not have any other childcare options available. He agreed, telling her to stay close. That high-end auto show would be crowded with rich collectors looking for a status symbol. She nodded with a serious look that made her seem much older than 7. She gave her old toy a tight squeeze, not from fear, but like she was sealing a serious deal with a trusted business partner. Outside, hooked up to his truck, the flatbed trailer was locked, loaded, and ready to roll. Under a tightly strapped tarp sat their mystery vehicle, waiting for its true value to be revealed. He picked up this vintage find 3 weeks ago without telling a single soul. Not because he wanted to hide his investment, but he kept quiet. None of the locals there had any clue about the massive payday hiding in plain sight. Besides, for a smart buyer like him, explaining the ultimate profit margin only ruins the thrill of the hunt. Mug in hand, he stood in his backyard, sizing up the valuable silhouette resting under that cheap plastic tarp. Early light hit the canvas, revealing a hidden gold mine that was about to wake up the classic car market. His late wife would have laughed. She would have teased that he was the only man alive who could spot a rusted pile of junk and see $1 million masterpiece. But it wasn't a joke, it was just a smart businessman's ultimate truth. Liam lifted little Arya right into their beat-up old farm truck. She squeezed Dusty tightly under her small arm. She stared out the window with the wide-eyed wonder of a kid, while Liam cranked up the loud, sputtering engine. Their noisy pickup and empty trailer rattled onto the asphalt, heading out into the cold, pale morning. A quiet, freezing dawn that was waiting to see what kind of fortune the day would bring. Stick with me. 3 weeks earlier, the freezing air smelled of wet dirt and cheap deals. Liam had driven 40 minutes out of town to a desolate farm liquidation auction. He found the listing in an obscure trade paper that nobody else was smart enough to read. You and I know these backwoods auctions, are completely ignored by the wealthy collector crowd. No fancy bidding paddles, no glossy brochures, and absolutely no rich investors sipping expensive champagne. Just hard, brutal reality. A sad liquidation sale of forgotten machinery from old properties with nobody left to run them. Every item was typed up with zero appreciation for actual value. Rusty scrap metal, broken tools, old wooden furniture, and random junk all sold as is. He drove out looking for cheap tools, but instead he found a legendary classic car worth a fortune. The fast-talking auctioneer was blasting through the barn inventory right as Liam walked up, dropping the gavel on junk at lightning speed, just trying to clear out before noon. Way in the back, sitting under a half-collapsed wooden lean-to near the property edge, sat a massive pile labeled simply as mystery scrap metal with no papers and no inspection. It was listed last, a total afterthought. Basically trash they threw on the manifest so they wouldn't have to pay a dump fee. The amateur bargain hunters had already moved on to bid on some cheap tractor parts. Nobody else realized they were standing feet away from an absolute goldmine. But Liam saw the profit. He strolled over casually, showing the kind of patience only seasoned traders have. Rushing signals desperation. A smart buyer knows how to keep his cool when he spots a masterpiece. Picture this, a wide, low-slung supercar frame, buried under 30 years of thick farm grease, covered in dry mud and wrapped in a rotten tarp that was practically falling apart. He knelt down next to the driver door, reached into his faded jacket, and pulled out the small flashlight he always kept on hand. He shined the thin beam across the decaying lower body line, checking where the rocker panel met the door. Then he aimed the beam just ahead of the front tire, searching for the dirty metal serial number. He wiped away the thick dirt with his sleeve. It read CSX with a serial number starting with 3. He stood up calmly and slipped the pocket light back into his coat. He strolled back to the bidding block, keeping his face completely expressionless. The opening price for this buried treasure was $80. Nothing. The auctioneer dropped it to $60, but nobody budged. A voice in the back yelled 100. Liam raised his hand, 120. Silence filled the auction room as they waited for a higher bid. Nobody else made a move. The hammer slammed down. He hauled that cheap clunker home on his flatbed, looking like any ordinary driver. Just a regular blue-collar guy in a dusty truck, towing a covered trailer down a quiet road. Later that night, after his daughter fell asleep. You and I know how curiosity pays off. Liam opened his laptop to search that rusty chassis number. The search results loaded, forcing the single father to freeze in absolute silence for several minutes. A 1965 Shelby Cobra 427 is one of the rarest, most valuable American cars ever made. Carroll Shelby only built a tiny batch of this legendary vintage racer before production halted in 1967. Only 300 exist, each carrying a unique CSX chassis number. Those letters stood for Carroll Shelby Experimental. Stunning auction records. Over the past decade, similar models had fetched between $1.5 and $2.5 million. Fully restored and certified, that final selling price could easily top $3 million. Liam sat quietly in his dark kitchen, letting the staggering value sink in before closing the laptop. He turned off the kitchen light and went to sleep. Let's look at the venue. The Holt Motors charity showcase was exactly the kind of elite, overpriced event designed to flash massive wealth and power. It was pure corporate ego and a smug display of expensive, highly inflated luxury taste. They held this gala annually, right in front of their massive regional headquarters tower, a shiny glass and steel monument covering half a city block. And on the morning of the event, the courtyard was packed with overpriced sponsor banners and exclusive display areas. A live string quartet played, creating the exact kind of pretentious, high-cost atmosphere that money buys in advance. A camera crew from a major business television network was already filming, following Evelyn Holt's publicist to shoot a costly corporate marketing video. Liam was only hired as a cheap support mechanic. His task was very simple. Transport 3 highly expensive vintage cars for wealthy collectors, handle any sudden engine breakdowns, and work until the gates closed. It was steady, predictable blue-collar labor. The modest paycheck that kept this honest father afloat every month. He loaded those high-end machines early, using his own basic truck and covered trailer for the transport. Honestly, he just hated leaving a multi-million-dollar asset sitting at home completely unguarded all day. He had no intention of displaying it, but he couldn't leave that fortune out of his sight. A condescending coordinator named Jackson Reeve blocked him at the entrance, a thin, smug guy in his mid-40s clutching a clipboard and earpiece radiating the kind of power-tripping attitude of a manager treating a simple trade display like a real battle zone. He scoffed at Liam's cheap vehicle, then eyed the canvas tarp concealing the real gold mine. He sneered at Liam, "Are you the support mechanic?" Liam just nodded quietly. Jackson threw a map at him, pointing out the low-value spaces reserved for service workers. It was Zone C, located far from the expensive showcases and the wealthy buyers. And whatever cheap junk is on your trailer, keep it away from my high-end entrance. The press is right out front. Liam took the map and entered his designated zone. He parked and got to work. He moved with the efficient, quiet rhythm of a professional who knows exactly how to bill his time. Highly precise, keeping a low profile. His daughter Arya hopped down, standing in that expensive staging area with her simple toy. She watched those high-priced vintage cars roll into their premium display spots, staring with absolute wonder at things with six-figure price tags. "Dad, they are so beautiful," she whispered. Liam gently squeezed her shoulder. "The beautiful things that do not know they are beautiful," he said, "are the real treasures." Arya stared up, storing those high-value words away like a smart investment. He sat her safely on a concrete step nearby, protecting his biggest asset while he got back to work. Then comes Evelyn Holt, arriving right on schedule at 10:30. She scanned the high-end inventory with a cold, calculated gaze of a corporate executive who knows exactly how to maximize the media value of this event. She wore a sharp, expensive suit designed to project financial dominance. Her commanding corporate presence instantly shifted the financial gravity of the room, just like heavy money always does. Spine stiffened, chatter ceased, eyes shifted fast. A media crew followed her. "You and I know that free press is pure profit, especially during a crisis." She marched straight into the cheap support zone while auditing her premium luxury inventory. And right there, she spotted an apparent financial eyesore. A loose canvas cover was pulled back just enough. Liam was tightening straps, leaving the hidden asset partially exposed, revealing a glimpse of his secret gold mine. It caught the sun in a way that demanded a proper valuation. Surface rust everywhere, but smart eyes looked past the damaged paint. Only raw metal remained where the protective coating had rotted away. Evelyn froze instantly. She glared at the seemingly worthless vehicle, then at the mechanic, who was busy servicing an expensive, high-value collector car, completely oblivious. She snapped her eyes to Jackson, her assistant, who was hovering right nearby. "What is that?" she barked. Her tone made it clear she would not waste precious billable breath on speaking to a low-earning mechanic. Jackson nervously mumbled that it belonged to their hired labor, but she was already marching over to inspect this potential liability. She stopped right by the rusted frame and just stared. "You and I know that look." She saw worthless junk, completely blind to the massive return on investment a classic car could yield. The news cameras kept documenting everything. Evelyn's voice echoed with the cold arrogance of someone accustomed to using her massive balance sheet to buy respect. "This is a high-profile luxury showcase," she announced, ensuring everyone heard her cheap shot. "Not a dirty junkyard." Liam calmly stood up from the expensive exotic. He dropped his rag, stood tall to defend his hidden asset, and said, "That vintage car is my property, ma'am. I am parked exactly where I belong." He was not begging for mercy or acting defensive. Just a smart owner stating the cold facts. "Let's watch this play out." Evelyn stared him down, blinded by appearances and completely missing the true value of the asset. She scanned his dirty clothes and the rusty trailer, completely blind to the real market value sitting right there. "Your personal property," she said. She spoke with the sheer disgust of someone who only buys retail. She scoffed at the rusty metal, completely blind to the vintage chassis beneath it, the kind of steel smart money fights over. The interior was a wreck, but smart eyes looked past the missing glass to the valuable frame beneath. "What did this junk cost? $20? Or did they actually pay you to haul it off?" The clueless crowd laughed, proving they couldn't spot a golden investment opportunity. The cameras caught it all. 10 feet away, his daughter Arya watched in silence, staring down the woman who only understood retail prices. It was that sharp look you give to someone who is about to make a very costly mistake. Liam stayed focused, keeping his eye on the prize. He held her gaze. $120, he answered. That cool confidence, the mark of a man who knows he bought low, made her billionaire mask slip for a second. She quickly recovered, laughing for the cameras as if she'd won a cheap negotiation. $120, she paused. This is the caliber of garbage currently parked at our elite automotive charity gala. Arya squeezed her toy, staying silent while the amateurs did their talking. Evelyn whispered to her head of security, trying to keep her bad business decision off camera, but loud enough that the value-focused mechanic heard every word. She demanded the car be gone before the deep-pocketed buyers arrived at 11 o'clock. Tow it if he refuses. Jackson marched over, using that aggressive corporate tone that never works on smart negotiators. He thought brute force would make the man fold easily. You need to drag that trash off the event grounds right now. Liam didn't flinch. I have a contract today. My ride sits exactly where your rich bosses told me. Jackson scoffed. Your paper covers mechanical work, not using us as a junkyard. Liam fired right back. Show me the exact ink in the contract forbidding it. Jackson couldn't find the clause. The fine print simply wasn't on his side. So the guard pulled out his phone and angrily called for backup. The standoff froze on the edge of a fight while Jackson tried to bypass the paperwork. Evelyn went back to her PR game, but her eyes kept returning to that hidden asset. Like a ruthless executive waiting to see if her hostile liquidation actually goes through. Liam stood firm. The morning dragged. The sun beat down, and elite collectors began crowding the high-end showcase entrance. Snooty music filled the plaza, the perfect soundtrack for people with cash but zero vision. This is where you and I spot the real investment. Liam whispered, you don't understand what this car is. If you touch that highly valuable chassis, you and Miss Holt will face a massive liability lawsuit that none of your expensive corporate lawyers can untangle in a single day. Jackson glared, squinting at the rusty trailer, unable to see the investment. To his untrained eyes, the rust screamed total loss. He didn't know how to evaluate assets. Is that a threat? The guard snapped. Liam replied, that is just information. Jackson ended his call, proudly bragging that a heavy flatbed tow truck was rolling to liquidate his asset in 15 minutes flat. The instructions were clear. Liam had to prep that vintage asset. Jackson strutted off after dropping his cheap demand, avoiding a technician whose actual technical value eclipsed his own inherited wealth. Little Arya stepped right up to her father, completely unprompted. She anchored herself by his leg, hugging her toy tight, her tiny familiar shield against this high-cost public humiliation. She didn't ask to be carried, just needing his steady backing. Liam rested his rough hand on her hair in a slow, calming gesture. Then he looked back at the rusted Cobra, completely unfazed. He knew its true market potential. Just sharp, calculating focus. It was the intense focus of an owner calculating a rapidly ticking clock. 15 minutes was a losing bet. With his lawyer 20 minutes away, his asset sat completely exposed. Moving this priceless vintage gem alone was far too slow, and none of these wealthy onlookers offered free labor. He knew the real stakes here. This sudden eviction was a staged, hostile corporate takeover. And you and I know the only thing protecting that multi-million-dollar Cobra was him. The heavy flatbed rig roared up in 12 minutes flat. A heavy flatbed swung around the pristine showroom corner, grinding gears like a forced liquidation order arriving on the floor. The wealthy speculators quickly backed away from the stage. The nearby news cameraman, sensing high-traffic viral drama over a standard car show, pivoted toward the conflict. The loud diesel idled as the operator stepped out, following Jackson's smug, pointing directions toward the trailer. Liam stepped directly in front of his high-yield asset. He kept his hands down at his sides, complete icy silence. He planted his boots directly between his hidden vintage jackpot and that ugly steel hook, bracing like a firm owner protecting a priceless vault. The operator caught his cold, dead-serious stare and froze. Being a practical blue-collar guy, the driver had zero interest in losing working hours over this high-society power struggle. He looked over at Jackson. Jackson panicked, looking to CEO Evelyn, who rushed out when she realized her high-stakes publicity stunt was losing its leverage. Evelyn ordered him, "Step aside." A cold executive command, but Liam countered with a simple no. She stared at the mechanic, totally bewildered by a level of resistance her corporate checkbook couldn't simply buy out. "You are actively blocking a legal operation on my private property," she snapped. "I can have the police here in 10 minutes. Liam replied, "Please do," not a single trace of sarcasm. That business-like tone rattled her far more than any angry shouting ever could. Evelyn scanned the whispering wealthy crowd, then glared at the recording camera. "You and I can calculate the massive brand liability unfolding here. An elite automotive CEO calling the cops on a working-class father over a simple parking dispute. The public relations damage was incredibly expensive. Yet she stood firm right in front of her high-net-worth investors and staff. She didn't reach the top of the corporate ladder by backing down without an ironclad excuse to preserve her stock value." Little Arya let out a small sound, no loud dramatic crying. Just the quiet, heartbreaking whimper of a child trying to protect her father and completely failing. Heavy tears streamed down the little girl's face in absolute, shattering silence. But she wasn't paying attention to the arrogant executive at all. Instead, she locked her tearful, pleading eyes directly on the tow truck driver. "Look at this with me. A child's total innocence, completely blind to who actually holds the financial and decision-making power here. Please do not wreck my dad's car," she pleaded. "It is his. He bought it." The tow operator hesitated. His hand froze right over the heavy winch control. He glanced at the little girl, then at Liam, and finally at the rusty classic. The driver remained frozen. Evelyn coldly refused to even look at little Arya. She glared at Jackson and commanded, "Continue." Liam slowly kneeled down to his daughter. He kept his voice incredibly quiet, ensuring only she heard his gentle words. The wealthy crowd fell completely silent, in that heavy, awkward way people do when something deeply personal suddenly cracks right through the polished veneer of a public show. "Look at me," he whispered. Arya met his gaze, eyes red, tears falling freely. She squeezed her stuffed animal until the seams almost ripped. "I am completely fine," he promised her. "And this classic ride will be absolutely fine. I promise you that." She nodded. Not because she knew he was right, but because she trusted her underdog dad completely. At just 7 years old, she already understood the massive difference between wealth and worth. He stood tall. He turned to face Evelyn and the silent high society crowd. And the glowing camera still recording every humiliating second. He spoke with absolute composure. "You are about to make the single most expensive mistake of your life. Not because I am taking you to court, but because 10 years from now, you will still deeply regret this very morning." Evelyn coldly held his defiant stare for 2 solid seconds. Then she spoke, forcing a breezy, fake lightness that required far more effort than she wanted to admit. "I will mail a check for $120 this afternoon." She dismissively waved her perfectly manicured hand at the tow operator. The steel cable began unspooling toward the rusty vehicle. But at that exact, tense second, a voice from beyond the wealthy crowd cut through everything. It was not a shout, never a frantic high-pitched scream. Just one word, spoken with the absolute authority of a major buyer who controls the room and demands complete silence. "Stop." Diana Weston had absolutely no plans of leaving the high-end display floor that morning. She was attending this classic car auction and showcased purely as an elite guest, having received a personal VIP invitation. The organizers knew her legendary name on the program guaranteed massive historical credibility. Her wealthy hosts valued that market prestige, even if they completely misunderstood her genius appraisal expertise. You and I know, Diana operated at the intersection of elite market knowledge and absolute authority. She authenticated priceless vintage cars for the famous Smithsonian collection. She was a featured market writer in 4 straight issues of Automobile Quarterly. And she walked away from massive consulting retainers offered by 3 major car manufacturers, refusing to compromise her objective market valuations for corporate giants. When Holt Motors reached out, she only accepted because the morning drive seemed worth the trip. Plus, she heard a pristine 1957 Benz sat on the floor ready for evaluation. She caught the ugly dispute echoing all the way from the VIP plaza. Not clear enough to determine the exact stakes. but clearly bad enough to realize this toxic scene was devaluing the charity event. She moved past the wealthy guests, quickly spotting the flatbed tow truck and that old rusty vehicle. Diana Weston instantly froze in place. She had been moving at a brisk pace, but her sudden stop was absolute. Let's look closely at the mysterious asset on that trailer. Just rusted bodywork covering a gold mine. Look closely with me. This silhouette hides a massive investment payout, a secret only clear to someone who knows the true market value of classic cars. Diana closed the distance in 10 flat seconds. She crouched by the front wheel, evaluating the lower edge. She just inspected it visually. Tracing her fingers along the frame rail, she stood up. Then she said, "Stop." The tow truck driver froze instantly. That single word held undeniable weight, the kind of authority money usually buys. No yelling, no anger, just absolute calculated certainty. The driver reacted like a man catching a scent of smoke, knowing a massive revelation was coming. Evelyn, the smug CEO, spun around, furious that this distraction was ruining her expensive luxury showcase. And Diana simply said no, nothing else. She was already circling the rusty car in a slow, deliberate path. Her eyes traced every inch of that beaten bodywork with the focused gaze of an expert appraiser deciphering a fortune only she could calculate. She reached into her pocket, retrieving a small folding magnifying glass. An essential tool she carried for decades. Using it was purely second nature. She bent down right by the chassis tag. She raised the magnifying glass. She read the serial number. For a long second she went silent, the disbelief of realizing a cheap scrapyard find is actually a $1 million asset. Standing up, she finally faced Evelyn Holt. Her expression was perfectly calm, not malicious. It was simply the calm look of someone preparing to drop a massive valuation truth on a CEO who had absolutely no clue. "May I borrow a handkerchief?" she asked calmly. Evelyn handed it over. The mocking crowd fell silent. Diana knelt beside the scrapyard car and laid down the cloth, and began rubbing the chassis, moving with the absolute precision of an expert investor who knew exactly what kind of fortune lay underneath. The entire crowd, even the arrogant Evelyn Holt, watched in silence. Diana stood up, handing the dirty cloth back without a word. She faced the wealthy crowd, looking nothing like an amateur, looking for cheap attention. "You and I can appreciate this moment." She looked at them like someone about to announce an absolute gold mine, demanding their undivided attention. "This is a 1965 Shelby Cobra 427, she announced. Then she recited the entire chassis number aloud, digit by digit. "This is no reproduction. It is not some cheap kit car built on a donor frame. This is a genuine, original production vehicle." The collective gasp from the elite crowd was completely genuine. It was the shocked murmur of collectors who instantly calculated the massive worth of that statement. They realized in real time that this $120 scrap car was actually a multi-million-dollar holy grail of vintage automobiles. Several eager buyers immediately grabbed their phones. Others turned to their neighbors, whispering urgently like investors witnessing an impossible seven-figure auction miracle right before their eyes. Diana kept talking, refusing to let the stunned crowd recover. She spoke with the steady, calm rhythm of an expert who had tracked classic car market values for decades. Knowing cold facts were the ultimate way to communicate. The Shelby Cobra 427 stands among the most valuable classic muscle cars ever created. Carroll Shelby built very few of them before 1967, and you and I know that scarcity drives the price into the millions. Only 300 built, each uniquely numbered for collectors. All tracked by that legendary high-value CSX chassis code. None matched. Every classic asset had a flawless paper trail. You and I know this was no joke. The rusty frame matched the registry perfectly. It was no rusty relic. It was the absolute jackpot of American car history. Yet there this $1 million asset sat on a flatbed, with a cheap tow truck idling 20 feet away. In its current state, Diana announced, her calm voice hiding the massive financial shock. The crowd went dead silent, sensing a massive payout. This vintage find holds a fair market value of $1.5 to $2.5 million. Once it gets a proper restoration with period-correct parts to protect that huge investment. That value easily climbs past $3 million. At auction, with full provenance paperwork, the selling price could go much higher. The wealthy CEO Evelyn Holt stood frozen in her expensive designer shoes. She had not budged since Diana appraised the multi-million-dollar classic. She was paralyzed, watching a massive fortune slip to an amateur leaves no place to hide. A cameraman shifted nearby, desperate to capture the exact moment the billionaire realized her costly mistake. Evelyn felt the camera tracking her. She knew bad press would cost her company millions in brand value. Diana slowly turned to Liam. Her focus was sharp and strictly business. "When did you calculate its worth?" she asked. Liam softly replied, "The day I paid for it." Diana stared straight at the underdog collector. "What was your actual buy-in?" $120, he answered. She went completely silent. The appraiser looked at the $1 million rust bucket, then back at Liam. "We rarely see this in business." The raw shock on her face was a once-in-a-career sight for her colleagues. Pure financial envy. "Most people who stumble onto this kind of margin," she whispered, "would flip it instantly." Liam shook his head. "I plan to invest in the restoration, not just cash out." He ignored the wealthy snobs entirely, focusing on the asset that just made him rich. A priceless asset like this deserves proper reinvestment, and then it deserves the open road. His daughter Arya stood close by, watching the man who had just secured their entire financial future. She reached out, her small fingers touching his hand as if realizing their lives had completely changed. She just stared at the once worthless junk car with the expression of a kid realizing a massive fortune had been hiding in plain sight, totally unvalued for such a long time. It was that moment when the concept of wealth finally clicked with a real-life treasure. Her tears of embarrassment had dried, though her stuffed toy was still tucked under her arm. She looked at her dad, seeing a genius who had turned $120 into millions. That loudmouth critic, Jackson Reeve, had quietly slipped away from the high-stakes scene. Honestly, no one cared when the broke-minded snob quietly vanished. A reporter shoved a microphone toward Evelyn, asking the most expensive question of her career. It was predictable, but in the media business, conflict translates directly to high ratings. "Ms. Holt, any thoughts on the multi-million-dollar twist that just happened today?" Evelyn had survived brutal shareholder meetings that were far more hostile than this crowd. She knew exactly how to protect her brand's market value, even when the ground crumbled. She immediately went into corporate spin mode. "You and I know the drill." She spun public relations lies about event logistics and her deep respect for history. "Let's look at her PR speech. All that talk about community engagement had zero real value." Her pitch was polished, just believable enough to hide the truth. But hype cannot beat actual asset value. The CEO stood inside the high-end venue she funded for 6 straight years. Yet the crowd only cared about a single, highly lucrative asset. The exact same vehicle she dismissed as worthless rust on camera just 13 minutes earlier. The sudden shift among these wealthy buyers was absolute and undeniable. These elite buyers knew exactly how to spot a real investment. Experienced collectors who knew everything about rare chassis numbers quickly swarmed the rusted Cobra, eyeing a massive financial payoff. Diana Weston stood right there, holding all the financial leverage, answering their appraisal questions with calm and extreme precision. Like a seasoned broker who knows the final selling price but keeps quiet. The reporter cut the cheap interview with Evelyn to chase real value, moving his entire crew over to focus the lens on the $1 million asset. "Stick with me here." The real value had shifted, and cameras chased that market mystery. Evelyn's assistant rushed over, carrying bad financial news, whispering that a viral video was tanking their brand value on local news sites over the last 10 minutes. An observer in the crowd recorded everything on a smartphone, capturing the CEO's terrible PR blunder, but the public did not care about the massive asset appreciation or sudden wealth. They focused on 12 seconds of a crying child ruining her brand equity, holding her toy and begging the snobbish buyers, "Please don't break my dad's car." Fearing a crash, Evelyn told her assistant to call their crisis manager to protect her investments, promising she would fix this within an hour. But the expensive consultant ignored her call, knowing her stock was plummeting. She tried again, then shoved the phone back into her high-priced designer jacket. She stood frozen in the luxury showcase where her high-net-worth buyers used to be, and this was not the calculated silence of a wealthy executive protecting an asset. It was the panic of an elite who tried to devalue a competitor. only to realize her entire brand equity and corporate reputation had dissolved into a million pieces. Wealthy investors walking past gave her stiff nods, distancing themselves from a toxic liability. None of those smart investors wanted to associate with bad press. The entire plaza was vibrating with gossip about the working man's multi-million-dollar asset, debating that chassis valuation and Diana's highly lucrative appraisal, marveling at how a single dad spotted $1 million treasure hidden under rust at a cheap local sale, and the foolish CEO Evelyn was completely locked out of the deal. This high-end gala, funded by her company, was celebrating the man with the massive return on investment. Facing zero control was a terrifying financial feeling. She had never faced this in any market she bought, funded, or ruthlessly controlled. You and I know that bad publicity kills profit margins, and she scrambled quickly to salvage her assets. She marched to the office because hiding her massive loss was her only remaining trading chip. She finally tracked him down after hours. Out in the loading zone, long after those fickle investors vanished and the multi-million-dollar classics were being secured, Liam quietly secured the straps on his newly valued multi-million-dollar asset, working with steady, experienced hands. Of a mechanic who built his fortune through sweat equity and smart investments. Let's analyze this together. Evelyn approached alone with no entourage. She waited until the collector secured his undervalued asset, finally speaking. "I want to offer compensation for disrupting your morning," the executive proposed. Liam stood tall and met her eyes, no anger, just absolute confidence. He was focused on his asset. "I don't need your cash," he stated. The executive processed that. "Then what do you require?" It sounded genuine, a sharp turn from the arrogant remarks she had made earlier at this high-end showcase. The collector quietly glanced across the empty staging lot. His daughter sat by the rusted vehicle, whispering to the valuable machine in a sweet, private voice. He watched his daughter briefly, then locked his eyes back onto the executive. "You staged your little public humiliation right before my kid," he said. "Insult me all you want, but that little girl is only 7 years old." She stood right there, crying her eyes out, thinking that some wealthy crowd was ruining her dad's prized possession. "She deserves a real apology, from you personally." The wealthy executive fell silent. The high-end auction lot had cleared, leaving a silence that felt absolutely deafening. Evelyn just stood in that heavy quiet, a rare sight for such a wealthy boss. She walked across the asphalt and knelt down beside the little girl. Kneeling on rough concrete was not easy in her expensive tailored designer suit. "Let's watch this play out." The CEO managed the damage, avoiding the spotlight while eating crow. The executive finally lowered herself to the little girl's eye level. "I said things today that were completely wrong," she admitted. "I insulted your dad's rare barn find, and I did it right in front of you. I am so sorry." Just stared, then she glanced over at Dusty. Then she locked eyes with the wealthy CEO, displaying the cold, pure judgment of a 7-year-old cutting through adult drama with childhood logic. A mindset that cares zero about public relations or protecting luxury brands. "Did you know what this classic was?" she asked. "No," Evelyn whispered, "I really didn't." Arya nodded slowly, mentally filing the wealthy woman's massive blind spot away. "My dad knew," she simply said. And that quiet pride wasn't arrogant, he simply knew the asset's true value. It was just the raw, honest pride of a young girl defending her dad. He always spots the hidden treasures that rich people miss. The CEO had zero comeback for that truth. She slowly stood up. She locked eyes with Liam across the auction floor, one long, telling look where the market truth was unavoidable, and then walked away. She never even looked back. You and I know that the smartest investments don't need loud applause. This was one. Before the father loaded his 7-figure asset onto the flatbed, legendary collector Diana Weston handed him a plain, heavy business card. The kind of elite, high-net-worth card with zero design, because it doesn't need any. She smiled, mentioning she knew the best restorer alive for that $1 million 427 engine. Picture this, an Arizona master who had restored only 3 of these incredibly rare assets. A specialist who would instantly recognize the massive fortune hiding under its rusted paint. She assured him her elite recommendation would carry massive weight with him. Her final advice: don't rush, this hidden gold mine waited 60 long years. You and I know waiting pays off. She stared at that gold mine of a cobra again. the look reserved for a rare, highly profitable treasure found in a barn. Then she walked away, showing absolutely zero emotion. Liam helped his daughter up into the old tow truck cab. She was exhausted, completely drained from watching all that intense public drama unfold. Not just tired, but totally spent, like her body crashed after surviving that wild auction floor adrenaline rush. Holding her toy tight, they finally left that snobby car show behind and hit the road, along with that $1 million Cobra hidden under plain canvas. It rode on the flatbed behind them with the quiet patience of a massive financial jackpot that waited years to be unlocked. Smart investors know patience pays off. The quiet underdog and his daughter drove in total silence. "Stick with me here." The expensive city skyline faded as they drove away. Inside the truck, the cold glare of those overpriced billionaire skyscrapers faded into a warm golden sunset. Arya kept staring out the dirty window at nothing in particular, then asked, "Dad, why didn't you tell those rich snobs about our car today?" Liam stared straight ahead at the highway, quietly calculating his response before he finally spoke. "Because some people only respect a huge price tag and they don't deserve the real story," he muttered. "Those wealthy folks only see value when there's a giant dollar sign attached. No amount of money fixes stupid." Arya thought about it. "Like me and my toy Dusty," she whispered. "I don't know his price tag, but I still love him anyway." Liam smiled warmly. "You hit the nail on the head, kiddo." Arya leaned her head against the cool glass and fell asleep within minutes. With her toy secured, she slept with the peaceful ease of someone who secured a major victory. Liam quietly drove onward through the long late afternoon shadows. Behind them, the cheap trailer sagged under the weight of that highly valuable asset. The heavy load rolled along the pavement, sending a steady, rewarding vibration straight through his steering wheel. And he always focused, spotting the highly profitable deals that foolish billionaires blindly ignored. Spotting undervalued assets in the trash was his most lucrative talent. You and I saw it today. Smart investments always beat mindless spending.